Greetings everyone and welcome to today's webinar, How to Successfully Implement ISO 9001 with a Minimal Documentation Approach. Happy to have you all here with us. I am Arta, Limani, the Account Manager of Quality Management Systems here at PECB and the organizer of this webinar. This webinar will be presented by Debra Hampton, PECB Certified Trainer and Lead Auditor of Quality and Environmental Management Systems. Please feel free to write your questions and comments in the question box in the right-hand control panel, or you can use the raise hand function. We will unmute you and you will have a chance to ask the question directly to Debra. Debra will answer to all questions accordingly at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Please, Debra, you may continue with the presentation.
Greetings and welcome to this course on ISO 9001-2015, and it is the implementation with a minimal documentation approach. As introduced, I am Debra Hampton and I am a certified lead auditor. I do third-party auditing to the ISO 9001 standard, the ISO 14001, and then the North American version OSES 18001. This is the third standard of ISO 9001 to which I have audited, and I've been auditing since 2001 for registrars. I get to see many systems and many methods of implementation, and today I want to share with you my knowledge and my experience and some of the goods I've seen and some of the poor that I've seen. I've seen systems that are minimally documented, as well as those that have so many documents that it takes a team to maintain their documentation. I also want to thank PECB for letting me make this presentation today. PECB does a great job of investing in our profession. So when you do have a question, please go to PECB for answers. They have a great team. Now let's look at the purpose of why we're here today. Okay, our course objectives are to present methods that you can use to have a minimally documented system that meets the requirements of ISO 9001. We'll be presenting an argument to those who currently have a procedurally based system to revamp their systems so that they are risk-based and process-based thinking. We're going to be talking about a method to verify that you are meeting requirements that is simple, effective, and very efficient. Some of these methods can even be used for your internal auditing. A quick outline of our material, and I'm going very fast on this, but because we've got a short time and I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions at the end. As you think of things, jot things down, put them in the question area so that we can address them at the end. I've divided the material into three sections. The body of it is going to be on how we can replace the quality manual and the other requirements of the previous standards. So how can we do that? And then the section 2 is going to be reasons for revamping your material versus retaining your current system. And the section 3 is going to be a method for doing internal auditing. Our section 1 is replacing the quality manual and the other requirements for documented procedures that we had in ISO 9001-2008. Under the 9001, 2000, and 2008 standards, we used our quality manual to act as the glue for the system. It was where you started. It helps us explain our system to our customers, as well as explain our system to others in our organization. That is, if the manual was not a regurgitation of the standard. So many times as a third-party auditor, I see quality manuals that are regurgitations of the standards. Many organizations still today, after 15 years with the 2000 and 2008 standard, will still have a manual that is a regurgitation of the words of the standard. And it has little to no value to the management system or to the organization. 2000-2008 tried to break this and specifically told us what the manual should contain. If you remember in your old 9001, 2000, 2008, it specifically told us what that manual should contain. It only gave us 3 things that should be in the manual: the scope and justifications of exclusions, documented procedures or reference to them, and then a description of an interaction to the processes of the system. If this is new information to you, please go to section 4.2.2 of your standard, look at it, and you'll see that what I am saying, that is all that is required to be in the manual. The new standard has no requirements for any documented procedures. It has no requirements for a manual. So nothing is left to hold the organization together. That can be a question. Well, in our 2008, if we met the requirements of that standard, we could actually have a quality manual that was often one page, which was a picture of the interaction of the processes, references to the procedures of the system, and that included the scope and any exclusions. So we were oftentimes seeing, as a third-party auditor, one-page manual. So if your system still has a quality manual that has multiple pages, then you never even updated to the 2000 or 2008 standard. So now our 2015 standard does not require manual, does not require any documented procedures, so what are we going to use is the glue. How can we do this? How can we have a quality management system without a manual or documented procedures? Let's turn to the standard for understanding. First of all, let's talk about what is a standard. A standard, is it leading edge thinking? No. It's not progressive thinking. A standard is the best practices that have been proven over the years to be the best approach, the standard approach. Progressive businesses implemented these practices years ago. A standard is what a good company does. It is established methods that work. So where is the glue? What's going to hold our system together? How can we know what documents we need? It all has to do with context and risk. Risk-based thinking is not a new concept, but it is a new requirement in the ISO 9001:2015 standard. The ISO 14001 and OSAS 18001 standards have not had requirements for a manual or any documented procedures now for a long time. Excuse me. Many organizations do create an environmental management manual or health and safety manual. Creating one has and always been a wasted effort, and one I have not seen yet add any value to an organization system. Risk-based thinking asks us to determine the context of the organization, then determine the risk as a basis for planning the system and its processes. This methodology determines the extent of the documented procedures, manuals, forms. It determines the extent of the documented information necessary to effectively mitigate the risk that the organizations face. So how do we know what documents are needed? Let's take time to repeat what we just said. This is such an important principle for implementation of the 2015 standard. How do we know what documents are needed? To do it and to understand, we first need to determine the context of the organization. We need to determine the risk, and then we determine the methods to mitigate the risk. We then will know what documents we need to ensure the risk is mitigated. This is a total new concept to what we have done in the previous standards. The context of the organization is a new concept with the 2015 standard. The standard requires us to understand the external and internal issues that could be relevant to its purpose and strategic direction. The standard requires us to consider external and internal issues that affect its ability to achieve the intended results of its quality management system. So what is the intended result of the quality management system? The purpose of the quality management system is to demonstrate the ability of the organization to consistently provide products and services that meet customer, statutory, and regulatory requirements. This aim is to enhance customer satisfaction. Note, this is spelled out word for word in section 1.B of the ISO 9001:2015 standard. So the question becomes, what external and internal issues affect an organization's ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer, statutory, and regulatory and aim to enhance customer satisfaction? Let's turn to our standard to think about those internal issues that could affect the consistency of meeting customer and regulatory requirements. The first thing is leadership. Our leadership and their commitment to meeting requirements of customers is an internal issue that could affect the purpose of the standard. A lack of assigning roles, responsibilities, and authorities could affect accountability. Lack of planning. I'm not going to read each one of these to you, but these are all things that are internal issues that could affect our ability to meet customer, statutory, and regulatory requirements. What I am going to point out to you is that what I have done is taken the highlights of the standard and gone through each subject in the standard and realized that those are the internal issues. Remember, the standard is based on practices that were established years ago, prior to 2015. So these are all internal issues that cause us and could affect our ability to consistently meet customer, statutory, and regulatory requirements. I did not come up with this list out of the clear blue sky. They came directly from the standard. External issues are also things that are outlined in our standard. External issues that can affect the consistency of meeting requirements are expectations from customers, interested parties, such as shareholders, if you have a union, your community, statutory and regulatory bodies, and then your external providers. So these are all external issues that are addressed in the standard. And I apologize to you for referencing only American regulatory bodies as I've thought about these, but each of you have regulatory bodies in your own countries. Okay, so what does all this have to do with minimum documentation? Well, it's setting the groundwork for what we're going to talk about. Minimal documentation was in the 2000-2008 one manual. We've emphasized that the standard was based on, I'm trying very hard to make sure you understand that it was based on previous practices. But it also, we still have to think about internal and external risk. And our goal is to minimize our risk, address all potential sources of risk, but yet do only what is necessary. So, as I said, the standard is in identifying the internal and external issues, but the standard also identifies the sources of our risk. What I'd like to propose to you to minimally document your quality management system is to think about the topics in the ISO 9001 2015 standard. Then think about what those, if they're an issue in the standard, then they are a risk to your quality management system. Think about the consequences of not addressing the risk, and think about what you're going to do as a control, a solution, or a mitigation. So our first one is lack of leadership. The consequences, leaders not being accountable for the effectiveness of the quality management system. So how can we control this? Well, our top manager, we'd have to go to him, but this could be one of the controls. So do you see how we can begin to look at the sections of our standard and address their consequences with controls? Do you remember I told you that this would tell us what documents we needed? Our risk was lack of competence. The consequence might be people doing work that affects the performance and effectiveness of the quality management system are not competent, which is a requirement in the standard. It's 7.2A. It's in ISO 9001 2015 7.2A. What we're going to do is our control is a competency matrix. That competency matrix is outlined, it's in bold, it's in italics, it's a document necessary to address this risk. Remember I told you that we're talking about methods to determine what are the documents necessary to meet the purpose of the standard. These are the documents that are going to be necessary to meet the requirements of the standard. On externally provided processes, the risk for products and services is failure to ensure that those processes conform to requirements. Excuse me. The consequence is that we would not be able to meet our service delivery requirements or our products not be quality. So we're going to put in some controls to meet those requirements. We even address section 4.4, which requires us in this particular quality management system to have process maps. If you don't know what a process map is, PECB has several webinars that I have done for them that goes into detail on how to do process maps. I hope you're beginning to get the picture that this risk and control table becomes the glue that we need to hold our system together. If you're I'm talking now as if you and I were having a conversation, but I hear so many people tell me, but our manual, we send it to our customers. What will we send when they ask for a manual? Well, let me suggest that if that manual really is how you're marketing yourself, turn it into a marketing document that becomes a beautiful work of art that describes your organization and what it can do for them. Let it have value if you're going to have a manual, but it is not a manual that is necessary for our quality management system. So let's summarize what we've just talked about. It's a summary of risk-based thinking. The first thing we're going to talk about is the context of the organization. When we're thinking of risk-based thinking, we think about the internal and external issues. We determine the risk as a basis for planning so that we can know how that it's going to affect our QMS, and then we determine what documented information we're going to need in order to address those risks. Remember that the standard requires us to maintain documented information as well as to retain documented information, which is going to replace the references to documents and records This is new requirement in the 2015 standard. I'm just reminding you of this. Many of you, I'm sure, are hearing this because this has been a big buzz. So if you'd like a copy of that required documented information, jot down my email address or contact me, and I'll send you a list of that required documented information that is listed in the standard. So now I'm coming to section 2 of this presentation, but it doesn't take long to finish up what we're going to be talking about. Should we revamp our material versus retain the current? So many systems that I am auditing today to the 2008 standard are still written to the 1994 requirements where there were 20 documented procedures. Those organizations are hampered by their quality management system. The quality management system is not an integral part of how they manage their system. And it is just, excuse me, went too far ahead. Please do not listen to those who are saying, there are a lot of people out there right now saying to you, you don't need to do anything much to update to the 2015 standard except to think about risk and put together a risk table. Those people are leading you down the wrong path. I really encourage you, revamp your system. The only thing that you have to have is that risk control table and the documents that are used to mitigate those risks. Those are the only documents that you are going to need in your quality management system. So let's talk about one more subject. What is the minimalistic approach to auditing the ISO 9001 2015 standard? If I were in your organization, I would put on my risk table, my risk control table, I would put the risk, I'd put the controller mitigation, and in the third column, I would put the evidence observed during the audit, and this is where my notes would be, and this is how I would audit the system. In summary, when implementing ISO 9001 2015 with minimal documentation, create a risk control table based on the requirements of the standard, address each requirement as a risk. If you use a document to control or to mitigate the risk, the document has value. If you have documents that are not on the list, then you've either overlooked a risk or the document is of no value. When internal auditing, use the risk control table as the criteria. And just a reminder that ISO 9001 2015 is a philosophical change in most of your organizations. What I have just described to you is relatively easy to put together your documentation, but if you are a procedural-based organization, you will most likely need assistance bringing about these changes in leadership and documentation that has to occur. I am asking you to please consider CE-Q to assist you in bringing about this transformation. Most organizations will need an outsider to work with your leadership team to get them realigned and following the expectations of the quality management system. Rarely will you, as an internal person, be able to make this transition. Our team will work with your managers to bring about this change, and in some cases can perform the work remotely with you using electronic media. We have actually done a few transitions to 9001 2015 using remote methods. Okay, so we work with that management team to bring about that transformation, and the new standard does expect a transformation in the management team. There are going to be some very hard questions that will be asked of your leadership team, so get them ready as you prepare for this new standard. Again, you see my email address there, you see my phone number, and we will do what we can to help you. We want to thank you, PECB, for letting us be part of this. And now, Arta, I'll turn it back over to you for some questions.
Thank you, Deborah. As Debra mentioned, now with the time left, we'll go ahead with questions. Therefore, if you have any questions, it's time to ask them. Please use the comment box or the raise hand function. We have a hand raised here. I will go ahead and unmute them. Terry, let's see. Go ahead, Terry. You could ask your question.
I didn't have a question. No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you. The next question here is, during transition phase to 2015 standard, if we eliminate quality manual, will that create problem in our surveillance audit, which will be done based on 2008 standard?
Yes. It's really interesting to me. Most of our 2008, when you're being audited the 2008 standard, what I'm seeing third-party auditors do is expect you to have it exactly meet the requirements of the 2008 standard, which also requires you to have a preventive action procedure, and there are no requirements in 2015. So many of our third-party auditors are being sticklers that you can't go ahead. You have to make the decision to turn off one system and turn on the second system.
Thank you.
Next question.
The next question is, what to do if a customer is not so advanced to recognize the minimalistic manual approach?
You will need help from an outside source. If your organization is not willing to talk about minimal documentation, it's because they don't understand the requirements and they're not putting the faith they need to in you. So, sorry, but you're going to need an outside person to bring about that change. It just won't happen with you being on the internal side. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a comment here that says, thank you very much for the simplest, easier, and profound explanation about the new standard challenges.
Thank you.
The next question is, why do you mention only risks but not opportunities?
That's a good comment. It is risk and opportunities, and I don't have a real good answer for that. The opportunities to me are, they're innate. I'm not sure. Your marketing people are going to use the opportunities thinking more so. I think if you address the risk and put the opportunities with it, the wording, you're right. I probably should have put both of the words at the top, but I see a risk, and the opportunity is to control that risk. So when you are seeing your risk, you're also looking at what is your opportunity to address that risk. So I tend to not see them too separated, but the opportunity word, I don't typically include it, probably just strictly from a typographical space type of thing. But good comment. Thanks for calling me on that.
Thank you. The next question is, if you had only began the 2008 standard with implementation plan, do you have to go over and revamp the plan to the 2015 standard?
Yes, you're going to have to, or you should.
The next question is, in this transition state, will the documented procedures still be kept?
If they are listed on that risk control table, if you find a reason that you should have them, if they are addressing a risk that you have in your organization, then yes. But if they are not addressing a risk in your organization, there is no reason to have them.
Thank you. The next question is, could opportunities also refer to business opportunities like breaking into new markets and industries?
Yes, like I was saying, that typically thinks, you think of opportunities and from the standpoint of marketing, but I still think of, if I'm addressing a risk, I'm also making an opportunity for myself internally to prevent that risk.
Thank you. The next question is, if an organization's customer has already if an organization's customer has already defined the detailed requirements for an organization's product, does the organization have to develop and maintain their own design and development processes?
I'm not totally sure that I understand that question. If the customer requires you in their contract to do something, of course you're going to have to do that. If you can add a little bit more to that question, if I have not addressed it, please add to it.
Thank you. The next question is, opportunities come from why the organization exists. Context should cover this.
Agreed. The context are the external and internal issues. The context, I think of it as there are things that are forcing you as an organization to do certain things. That's the context of the organization. What forces from the outside as well as from the inside are forcing you to do certain things as an organization. And you build things in your system to address those. The interesting thing, and I appreciate that person saying profound, the interesting thing to me is those are all listed, pretty much all listed in the standard. There's going to be a few more that are going to be specific to each organization, but most of them are already listed in the standard. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a hand raised here. I believe the name is Tisokabar. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and you can go ahead and ask your question. I have unmuted you. You can go ahead. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay, we can move on to the next question. Unfortunately, his mic is not working. The next question is, do we need to develop a business plan where we can explain the risk and how to control the risk and take measures?
There is no requirement in the standard that you have a business plan. There are some requirements where the strategic direction must be known in setting the policy and the objectives, and there has to be a flow from that strategic direction, from that context even into the strategic direction, into the policy, into the objective. So there's a flow of information, but there is not a requirement for a specific business plan. There is a requirement that you address the risk and then say what the opportunities are if you control those risks.
Thank you. The next question is, do the words determine, define, plan imply documented information?
No. The only time that there is a requirement for documented information, you will see the word maintain in front of it or retain documented information. Maintain documented information or retain documented information. And if you want a copy of that, I've listed all those. If you'll email me, Debra at ce-q.com, I'll send you a copy of that. And I'll also try to get it up on my website. I haven't gotten it up there yet, but I will have it on my website before too long, which is ce-q.com.
Thank you. The next question is it easier to implement the 2015 standard if a company has never had a quality system?
It's about the same. From what I have done, I prefer working with a company that didn't have a quality management system before, that was formal. Every organization that is in business that is successfully making money has a quality management system. They have a method of meeting their customers' requirements. They don't always meet all the requirements of the standard, and there's a gap, there's some things missing, but they have a management system. So even those, they've already built forms in, they've built ways to communicate with each other, but it is easier because I don't have to undo these long procedures that are very wordy, and I don't have to convince someone that it's okay to get rid of the quality manual. So from that standpoint, it's just a learning curve that is harder if you already have been registered to 2008. The mindset, changing the mindset is what's difficult when you're going to if you're working with a company that has never had a system before.
Thank you. I have a hand raised by LT Cole M. I'm going to go ahead and unmute your mic, and you can go ahead and answer your question. Go ahead. I believe. Would you like to go ahead and answer your question? Okay, let's move on to the next question. Did I hear you say no need for an ISO 2015 QMS manual, or at most a one-page guide?
You did hear me. There is no requirement for a manual. None. There is no requirement in the ISO 9001:2015 standard for a quality manual.
Thank you. The next question is, which clause in ISO 9001 states that a risk control table is required?
There is nothing in the standard that tells you a risk control table is required. Nothing in the standard. It requires you to address the risk and opportunities. What I have presented to you is a way that you can do that and do minimal documentation. And that is the purpose of me showing you a risk control table, is to show you how you can do it.
Thank you, Debra. The next question is, should the risk-based approach be applied to each shall in the 2015 standard?
When I've gone through and done it, it's not each shall, but it's each requirement. Sometimes, and I'm thinking about in competency. If you think about it in competency, there's more than three. I'm going to go back to that slide real quick. If you think about incompetence, there is more than 4 shalls in that section, but there's only 4 consequences, which are really like taking the requirement and turning it backwards, the consequence. And so it's not a consequence for every shall, but it's thinking about what is the consequence of lack of competence. And this is so hard to explain but without you looking at a standard. But when you look at the standard, yes, you're going to meet every requirement of every shall, but it's not necessarily listing every shall. I hope that makes sense to you.
Thank you. The next question is, where in ISO 9001:2008 would I look to identify risk-based approach to an organization?
In 2008, there's nothing. In 2008, there's nothing. In 2015, I'm still learning the numbers, and if it's in that section 4, where it's talking about the, it's kind of setting the stage in section 4. but I do not remember the exact number, but if you want to email me, I'll pull that up for you. I just don't have the standard in front of me right this minute. Sorry about that.
Thank you. The next question is, with the HLS moving various standards to a common format, do you see more detailed risks across 9001, 14001, and 45001 coming together in the risks matrix?
No, I don't. Because when I have implemented an integrated system, I don't in the body. Now, the internal audits, of course, they're addressing the same risk. The corrective actions are addressing the same risk, and your management review is addressing the same risk. Your competence is addressing the same risk. External providers, but the body, you're going to still have to have a risk control table for the aspects in the environmental, and then for the hazards with the health and safety, you're going to probably have to have a different table or a different thought process for how you're going to prevent the risk associated with hazards and aspects. That's typically the way I've done it, just to kind of keep my thoughts straight. There's some commonality, and you guys, I'm answering these questions off the fly, so sometimes I have to formulate my thinking there as we go, but there's some commonality, but it is also some succinctly different requirements.
Thank you. The next question is, there is a concern about the third-party auditor's interpretation of the new standard. Some auditors demand for documented evidence, procedures, and records, and refuse to believe that action has been taken without documentation. What do you think auditees should do in order to convince them?
Ask for another auditor. I am a third-party auditor. So please, and I'm sure there are many third-party auditors that may be part of this conference today, but a third-party auditor who is asking you to do things that are not requirements of the standard, they need to first be reported to their registrar. And then if you do not get any support from that registrar, you need to report that auditor to whoever they're registered with, the third-party auditor. I came across a third-party auditor just the other day who is no longer certified to any, they're not certified by PECB, they're not certified by Exemplar Global, they're not certified by IRCA, so there's nobody to report them to. And your registrar is your only recourse on that. But please, do not let a third-party auditor make you do things that are not requirements in the standard. Report them to their registrar. And if you have one like that, call me. I'll help you fight. I despise a third-party auditor who expects you to do things that are not requirements in the standard.
Thank you. Another question is, according to ISO 9001, 2008, organizations had to produce 6 quality control procedures, document control, record control, etc. With the new ISO 9001, how many documented procedures do organizations develop?
None, unless they are evidence. If they are a document that, I used the wrong word there, they're not evidence. Let me look at this slide that I've got in front of you right now. There is not a requirement for any documented procedures. None. But if there is a document that you are using to address a risk, then it is a requirement. But there is not a requirement for a documented procedure. When I am implementing systems to the ISO 9001-2015, I am not having any procedures. In some cases, I will have a process map if it is necessary, but I do not have them unless it is addressing a risk.
Thank you. Another question is, although you said you do not need a business plan for ISO 9001-2015, do you agree it should be in the organization's business plan?
If the organization needs it and wants it, they can have a business plan, but there's no requirement in the standard for a business plan. They require you to know your strategic direction. Let me give you an example of this. If you're a manufacturing facility, what is your strategic direction? You need to be doing everything you possibly can to have quality parts on time. You need to be doing everything you can to get efficient with all of your actions and become very effective in meeting your customer requirements. That's your strategic direction. You don't need a business plan to outline that. If you're a hospital, what is your strategic direction? You need to make sure that you get patients in, get them diagnosed, get them served, and release them so that you do no harm. That's your strategic direction. You don't need a business plan. So there's nothing in the standard that requires that you have a documented strategic direction. So your strategic direction, you remember I said your top management. They're going to be able to need to say these things and talk to those third-party auditors. The 2015 standard involves our top management more than any previous standard.
Thank you. The next question is, does the definition of documented information include restrictions on the media, format, and source of documented information?
There are no restrictions on what the documented information can be. It can be electronic. It could be recordings, verbal, like a recording, an MP3 file. There are no restrictions on what you use to present as documented information.
Thank you. Another question is, since there are different types of risks which score different on risk scale, what risks should be captured and which should be omitted in the minimal documentation approach?
Please note that I did not talk about a numbering system. There is no requirement in the standard for you to put numbers in. When I have been involved in groups where they're trying to put numbers in, we spend all this time arguing about what number it should be. I believe that the standard lists all of the risks to the organization. There's going to be a few more for each that will be specific to your organization. But if you went through and talked about all the requirements of the standard, then you're going to address 90% of the risk, at least 90% of the risk to your organization. And putting that, I think you've got to address all of those risks. We're not talking, when you use numbers, it's when you're trying to figure out where you want to start in a situation. You're prioritizing what you can put your resources to. All of these are requirements that have to be met. So I didn't mention numbering systems, and I don't use them.
Thank you. Another question is, will third-party auditors be looking for objective evidence to address the shalls in the 2015 standard?
Yes, because the purpose of auditing is to take the audit criteria, which is your planned arrangements and the standard, and when you do third-party auditing, you take the planned arrangements of the organization, you take the standards you're auditing to, and you look for objective evidence. Objective evidence does not have to be documented information except for those instances where it prescribes that you will retain or maintain documented information.
Thank you, Deborah. Because of the time limited, we will have to conclude this presentation. However, if you have any other questions, you can send your questions through email and we will answer to them individually. Thank you again, Deborah, for this clear and informative presentation. Also, I want to thank all the attendees for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. To keep up with our webinars, please check PECB's webinar schedule in our website, pecb.com, or our official social media network. Since next week, we are organizing webinars on interesting topics. Next Tuesday, we are hosting a webinar on the topic Quality Management Systems for Service Companies, according to the new version, of course. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Arta, are you still there?
Yes, Deborah?
Okay. So how many did we have?